reliably. And they are also a leading SRE automation. Okay. The leading SRE automation tool that is reliably.
Yeah.
Sal is passionate about evolving best practices of site reliability engineering. And they will be talking about site reliability engineering in the cloud. So over to you, Sal.
All right, cool. Well, hi, everybody. I actually really enjoyed the first talk, Terraform. I think that's a really cool idea. Yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Can you let me know up front, how much time do I have?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay. I promise I will stick on time.
You got this.
So welcome, everybody. If you can see my full screen now. All right. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So today we're going to talk about site reliability engineering in the cloud. I'm trying to keep it pretty broad, pretty agnostic to the tooling, because I really want to talk about what it means to do this from the day-to-day and how you can be implementing it well. So thanks for having me. The first thing we're going to go over is sort of generally the who, what, where, why, and when, and then a little bit into the how-to of really automating and moving from just infrastructure as code to genuinely like fully observable, reliable systems as code. So let's start with what SREs really are. So I love the definition from Google, really the ones that pioneered SRE. I love Ben Trainor's definition of it being what happens when a software engineer is tasked with what used to be operations. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced and complex than that, especially as the systems that we're trying to do reliability engineering on become more complex. So if you're new to SRE or if you've been in SRE for a while, I think it's interesting to understand that, I work in a lot of different spaces and I see people wearing SRE hats that don't always necessarily have the title. So I want you to be able to observe either who they could be in your workplace or how you could be that in your own workplace to improve your systems. So there's the pretty traditional model of a distributed SRE. This is kind of like a consultant that is responsible for the reliability of your entire system, right? This is closer to that idea of that sort of like magical sage SRE that comes in and has so much knowledge about the type of the architecture that you have in place that they can really help you with it. Increasingly, though, I'm seeing them be genuinely embedded onto teams. So, and someone who is acting functionally as an SRE, but who's genuinely involved in the day-to-day development of the code and who's building it in tandem with the DevOps deployment. There's your infrastructure SREs who are specifically tailored around the CI/CD practices. And then there's tool-driven SREs, which are also a little bit abstracted. So those are ones that are specifically looking at helping you monitoring and observing your systems, but aren't that involved in building it necessarily. Now, how do you spot an SRE at HashiTalks? It means they're probably going to be using these tools, right? Anything that gets you closer to infrastructure as code. You're going to be using Terraform. You're going to be using Nomad most likely as a way to start testing out the way that you're building out being able to re-spin up your deployments. So I won't be going into a lot of detail on this today, but there's a really cool talk just a couple of weeks ago on fuzzing Nomad with Nomad. So if you want to take a slightly different approach than the one that we're talking about today with your tooling set, I just think this is a really cool way of automating the way that you want to test your systems. But I also want to say that even in this talk, even this one, so this was Kent's talk on fuzzing Nomad with Nomad, it's a good idea that's super CPU intensive. So I want to talk today about how we make meaningful choices about testing our systems. And that starts really with monitoring. So for monitoring software, that means that we are actively building telemetry into the systems, which is the process of recording the behavior of the system. And we want to be doing that as we build, right? So you're using your Prometheus endpoints, or if you're sitting over any sort of cloud hosting, using their endpoints to be able to, or making sure that you're making those visible to yourself. This is a pretty simple concept, monitoring. But there's an added complexity, and I've had 2 conversations this week with people who've worked in SRE for over a decade, and it was interesting to me that in that conversation they're still having subtle disagreements about what is observability for software architecture. Do we have a field-wide, genuine definition of this. It comes originally from control theory. But I think when we're talking about using observability in our software systems, we're generally talking about something that's a little bit more nuanced. We're really trying to talk about what is it that we have to surface about our systems to be able to understand them. And I think I do think about this a little bit differently because of my background. So yes, I work in SRE at this time, but my first job ever was in the cognitive engineering of Boeing cockpits. So when you think about designing a cockpit, right, the idea of being a pilot, of flying up in the sky, it's a romantic idea, but in reality, you build these machines to be able to understand the state of that entire airplane if you have zero visibility at all. So when you're designing your dashboards, right, when I'm designing a cockpit, for example, the dashboards that you're trying to build out for your systems should have that kind of ability. You want to be surfacing just the information that makes you minimally aware of what could go wrong with your system. You don't want to be distracting yourself. And that's why it's so interesting to be doing SRE in this space where we're beginning to have incredibly complex systems. Our telemetry for those systems is becoming more complex. And it's really getting the human edge and the human understanding of large scale system failure that we're trying to catch up to. And the reason why I wanted to come to HashiTalks and talk a little bit more about this is because there's a talk like 2 years ago from the Nomad group. And I think they put it really well in just making us aware that everything that we do observes the laws of thermodynamics, even software. So even if I was to create the world's most stable monolith, it could still and will still eventually fail. So as we want to perturbate and test our systems, we want to become more aware of what type of decay we're going to be seeing across all aspects of our architecture. So in my definition, and genuinely this is a personal definition for observability, I define good observability in SRE as signal processing of the state of a system that will continuously change with use and decay over time, right? I want to create a really good cockpit so that I know it can steer both my team, my development, and my business value forward by making sure that what I have is a stable system. This is really important to me because in the area that I work, I am not a traditional sort of DevOps or SRE. I'm really interested in this space because I build out machine learning and artificial intelligence models on top of like widely distributed infrastructure. So for example, geocaching systems that are globally distributed. And it's really important to me to understand, is the accuracy of the hypothesis that I'm trying to test with my machine, it's the accuracy of the answers and the resolution of the answers that I can get are directly dependent on the reliability of the software underneath it. So this is an incredibly hard question to answer, or an incredibly important question to answer. Are you building the right way, and can you trust what you've built if you're trying to answer real world questions on top of it? I do have a couple of ideas that if you are really interested in like learning and understanding this field of SRE and observability and AI and ML operations, there's a couple of interesting ways where you can use surfacing and observability and automating some of that observability and getting your system to be more literally self-aware using some of these models. That is for an entirely different talk. I will go over my 30-minute limit if we go into that today, but if you're interested, let's be in touch. Today, we're really talking about SRE on the cloud. What is it? How do you do it? So let's talk really broadly about who are SREs right now. If you are currently having that as your title, right? If you were actually formally an SRE, even those, almost 2/3 of them said that as a professional site reliability engineer, the workspaces that they were in had only had that in place for 3 years or less, had a formal process of doing site reliability engineering alongside or as an extension of their DevOps process. Now in 2020, I really liked seeing this statistic come out that about 41% of individuals that work in SRE or are familiar with SRE saw it as being a like natural part of the same DevOps team. I think that that's really the right way to see it, right? You want to be an embedded SRE. You want to saturate all the tacit knowledge that you have about your development into the way that you observe it. About a third of them thought it was complimentary. And I think today, if I can convince that like 1/3 of people that either don't know or think it's competitive, that it absolutely is not, and that you can, right? This is going to make a really, really harmonic way of building out your systems if you observe the right things. The one thing that bothered me about that report was that even those that have the claim that they're doing full SRE, only about a third of them are reporting that they're actually doing end-to-end error or performance budgets. And I think that's a problem because the error budgets are really the bread and butter of doing SRE well, and making sure that as an organization, laterally, everyone understands what the value is of the development that you're doing. So error budgets are very simply the amount of error that a service can accumulate over a specified period of time before users grumble about the experience. Now, if we jump back to that metaphor that, I hope nobody has a fear of flying, but if you jump back to the metaphor of having a dashboard to see the systems that you're developing and to understand their stable states, it really is anything that would affect the passengers on your airplane, right? Like, are you doing something that really affects their experience? And if not, just keep developing on the features that matter. So we're able now to work in this way and to really start moving from the focus of just creating stable systems to just creating stable systems with the intention of providing a strong service to the end user because of some of the things that we've learned and work with now from DevOps practices, right? We understand that the bigger the silos, we very much translates to more lines of code that need reviewed to solve a bug. So we do want to be moving in an incremental way. That's these small changes, the faster to fix or to roll back in a panic. But we really want to be moving. I think the only difference culturally from doing DevOps to SRE, once you have observability in place, is that it makes sure that you have a communicated understanding of not just the gradual and incremental changes, but why those changes are meaningful to your business and to your team. So I always get asked, isn't SRE just better monitoring and automation? And yes, but also very much no. And the reason for that is if you start to work in this way, we're all subject to Conway's law. Any organization that designs a system will produce a design structure that is a copy of the organization's communicational structure. So we're shifting from having business intelligence that helps us to define our features. Yes, that's still important, but when we're monitoring and putting automation at the center of what we're doing, the health of our services starts to become the center of your business strategy, right? Have I created a stable system that I can continue to build on and provide things that excite and delight my users without ever having them grumble, right? If I can minimally make sure that they enjoy what they're receiving, then I'm making sure that I only think about the reality of user experience in the way that I translate my developer time. And that helps to create a really healthy feedback loop, right? The only thing that matters is if people are happy at the end of the day with the thing that I built. And as a developer, I really want to be getting that information. So SRE is a measuring and monitoring practice as well. And you have to do this on the dimension of time. And there's 3 things that we are aware of. The first are always the service level indicators. That's basically just a statement saying that X should be true. Now you can extend service level indicators into service level objectives, which is saying I want X to be true, Y percentage of time. And then you can wrap all of those underneath things that are service level agreements, SLAs. And those are literally the contractual or fiduciary understandings that you have in a B2B or a B2C arrangement, where there's going to be actual consequences if your system is not available to a specific period of time or to a specific objective. Today, we're just going to talk about SLOs and SLIs. Mostly because if you stay under those, you're never going to hit your SLAs. You really want to build something that you're monitoring and keeping so stable that you're never at risk of providing a catastrophic experience for your user. So if we're looking at a service level objective, we can say that we want, it's we call this all about the nines. So we try to get like 99.9 something availability or reduction in latency, for example. So let's say for this, an SLO of 99.95 availability. It's a little meaningless. It's, something to aim at. But if you turn this into an error budget, we immediately understand what we're actually trying to get. An error budget mathematically is super simple. You just take a 1 and minus the service level objective, and then you transform that into your function of time. So 99.95% of an SLO of availability is literally translated to 21 minutes and 54 seconds of a service inside of your architecture being allowed to not be fully available to your end user over a month. So you're allowing your system to have a little bit of flexibility because our systems fundamentally cannot approach 100% availability. And the more you extend your systems, the less available, the less accurate, the more you're going to have to reduce these SLOs in combination. But if you incorporate these error budgets, it becomes a fundamental part of the way that you start thinking about development, because as a cognitive engineer, right, I have now put my software engineers into a place where they're now thinking preventatively. They're thinking about curing their system before it gets sick, right? And we can now work around trust and timely innovation because they know now that they're working on a system that's going to be stable as they build out new and exciting things. So if you're doing SRE well, it's a practice that you've put into place. It's something that changes and evolves over time. Yes, you want to automate. You do want to monitor your systems, but you want to go through this ongoing process of learning how to tell a story about the things that we're monitoring, seeing those violations as opportunities, building out and changing our error budgets, and then communicating that picture to your entire organization. So let's step through these really quick. So if you are just starting out with SRE and you want to set up your first monitoring system, you want to tell a simple but compelling story about what your system is doing. You can do this by choosing 2 or more SLOs from different services, but I would recommend not choosing more than, don't choose more than 5 when you first set up your dashboard. You really want to be making sure that as a person, you can understand what your data is providing you. And you want to get an end-to-end view of that product reliability. So you want to be capturing both the availability and the latency of your system. I'll show you how to do this in just a second. A thing that you want to also keep in mind is that you're going to have violations. Your system is going to go down. View those as opportunities. Like, we want to get excited when things start failing because you understand that this is your opportunity to make it a more resilient system. But over the course of a quarter on average, I would say, you want to take your immediate actions and write. Traditional site reliability engineering has this extension in it, which is called pager duty. It's literally who is on call to be responsible for the system when there's a catastrophic failure. I've taken all of that part out of this talk because I want you to get excited about SRE and not afraid of it. That is the scary side of SRE. But I think that we're at a place in the nuance of the telemetry that we have and the ability to put in machine learning and AI models to start doing this, that pager duty is going to be handed over to machines. And we can start building out much more complex models because we have a system that self-monitors and self-heals. I've made this one big because it really matters. And this is like, I think that there's a bunch of engineers in this room, but this is for management. Error budgets and error budget blowouts are a good thing. They're a good thing. The only real difference between SRE and DevOps, like, we're not trying to never fail. You don't have a healthy environment if people aren't willing to take risks with the things that they're building. You want to have a healthy amount of risk in the things that you're building, but you want to fail in a measurable way. And that's the fundamental difference once you've put your monitoring and your observational systems into place. And then the final part of this process, and it's iterative, right? You want to talk to your entire team. You want to talk to your customers about what they're really experiencing from your system. And talk to your team about if the SLOs that you currently have in place really make sense after a fixed period of development or after another release, right? Are you actually measuring, or do you have the right estimation of how much downtime your system can afford before customers really care? And it's like, I know that I said this right before, but let's let's make sure we understand that it's a completely different environment to be working in if you have a team that is doing SRE genuinely and with good hygiene, because it is the team now that is holistically working together to create a system that fails less and provides maximum value. So if your question right now is, great, why isn't my team doing SRE already? The answer is they probably are. It's very possible that you have someone who is at least incredibly interested in making sure that your system is more reliable, because even if you tend to see the person on the sort of DevOps team or the deployment team, whoever it is that implicitly has the pager duty, even if it's not defined as their job, they're gradually becoming your SREs, right? And you really want to upskill those people. If only to keep them employed in your environment, right? Because they're the ones that want to stop having to put out fires. It really helps your team to have a shared understanding of what you're building. But if you want to practice this, right, you're probably in this talk because you want to understand how to do this on the cloud. There's a couple of telemetry systems that you can use, but I'm going to show you a really simple one that's free and open source that makes it really easy to put your SLOs and SLIs into place. I'm working with this team at Reliably, and one of the rules with the project strategy is like, you have to be able as a developer to get from like concept to actually having it running in less than 5 minutes. So if you wanted to just put SLOs and SLIs into place today, you can actually do that. You can also do a lot of other stuff with this, like scanning your manifests and seeing if your like deployments will run reliably before you deploy it. If you're interested in that, I'm giving another demo tonight that will be recorded. That's like much more on the tech side. But today we're talking about SLIs and SLOs. So let's go for it. Remember, when we are setting up our error budgets, we got to get those SLOs, and we're going to define a percentage of availability or latency that we think is acceptable. If we're doing this on cloud, right? If you are at like with HashiCorp or using any of their services or systems, you're probably building out on a multi-cloud platform, or at least considering that. It's 2021. You can build out different SLIs pointing to those different endpoints and compare the SLOs across them. You do want to do this because there's absolute limits to the availability of what cloud providers do offer. So what does this look like in practice, right? If in less than 5 minutes, I want to just set this up in my own system, I will assume in this case that I've already just downloaded Reliably into my file system. And I'm going to just say SLO init. I'm going to say, all right, this is the name of the service level objective that I want to declare. We're going to focus around availability, our initial target. What's the cloud provider we're going to use? What's the ARN for it in this circumstance, right? We're building out the basic building blocks, and this is tied to your telemetry. So you are now able to monitor in less than 5 minutes what your accuracy is and to keep a hold of this. Now, if you're asking the question, like, right, we have Grafana, right? We have the ability to observe some of these things. I think it's much more important to view and observe the dependencies. It is much more important to really observe the dependencies between SLOs because those really affect you. So I think we can jump out of this, but I would love to see, if you step off of this call and you really want to play with this, anything that you're deploying right now, you can just set up your basic SLOs and SLIs, and then you can start reporting them. So I think where this gets really powerful is starting to think of these as historical records. And again, I'm not going into a lot of detail into the ways that you use this today, but if you start to report your SLOs and your SLAs, then you can see it read out like this, right? What is our target? What is the difference between what we currently have available and what we were targeting at? And I want to have a continuous understanding of why and when we're reaching this sort of standard of practice that we want. And also asking those questions, right? Having this readily available on any given day allows me to see when there's a surge in my system, when there's been something that's, before I get a bunch of, angry phone calls from customers, or I lose a bunch of downtime, right? Because, I'm talking about these in sort of general terms to help you sort of enjoy and understand the SRE story. But downtime is a monetary problem. If you've got a like medium-sized service, the average amount of money lost per minute is around $500 US. If you're running a like large service with like a couple thousand users, that generally goes up on average to a few $1,000s, about $10,000 per minute of downtime for some of these major like e-commerce sites, even if you're just losing a single region. So you really want to start tracking these and getting them fixed before it becomes a PagerDuty problem. Now, I did want to make this a bit of a quick whirlwind, in part because I wanted this to be a higher level talk of what is SRE when we're doing it in cloud and in multi-cloud. What are the building blocks and understanding that I need to have to be able to position that out? But I also think you're all human beings. And while I don't get a chance to meet you all in person, I am curious. I got to talk a couple of weeks ago to this guy, Nolan Gasser. He was the head data scientist for Pandora. And we were talking a lot about like data systems and like how you organize knowledge around really complex fuzzy forms. Like how can you define someone's favorite song? And it's an open question, but if you have other questions, I would love for you to also follow up from this talk. Send me your favorite song, particularly if it's an exemplar of sort of where you're from. I think that that's really enjoyable for me, and it lets me know that like, yes, you're all engineers, but you're also human beings. We can sort of broaden the discussion around that. But if you do want to have some more talk and discussion around really building out cool systems, then get in touch with me. I have a couple of requests for you on this call, or if you are watching this talk sort of on YouTube later on. I have the incredible privilege to have a bunch of interns at Reliably who are, I think, much smarter than I am. And we're currently working on a couple of different projects. So we're trying to get a little bit of data. If you're interested in understanding sort of the cognitive profiles and the problem solving techniques and maybe the differences between those in DevOps and SRE, then please go to the tiny URL for cognitive SRE. We're also looking at some of the technical stacks that people are using for SRE, sort of broadly what the correlations are between the type of SRE and the type of stack that you need to do. If you want to follow up on some of the things I've shown you, reliably.com/docs is a good place to be. But I also want to highlight, right? So we are working in site reliability engineering that really pairs super well with chaos engineering. If you want to look at a really interesting investigation of how to mindfully test your systems and to think about understanding broadly how the way that we test, build, like churn and toil over our systems, right? Look at this chaos engineering for blockchain because it really helps to think about engineering well and holistically. And it's just a super cool demo built by one of my incredibly smart interns. So that's all I've got for now. I am happy to open up to questions. I know I kept it pretty high level, so I'm happy to answer anything that's more detailed or in the chat as well.
This is awesome. Everyone in the chat can agree that this has been a very good talk. I'm particularly excited about this because I've been aware of the SLO discussions on Twitter lately, and also looking forward to the SLO conf. So this is like a good introduction to SLO, and I will agree with the community that you're excited to hear this talk. So awesome, thank you. And if you have any further questions for Sal, please drop it in the YouTube chat, and they will be happily available to answer your questions. So Busayo, who is our next speaker?
All right.
Yep. Thanks again, Sal. Our next speaker is Ahmad Abdulaziz, and he's talking about optimizing MongoDB query performance. So I don't know if it's on. Ahmad?
Yeah, Marangalo, can you guys hear me?